Hey, welcome back to E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, for people joining us for the first time on E-commerce on Tap, do you want to give a quick tidbit on what E-commerce on Tap is?
Absolutely. So each episode, we take a well-known venture-backed company, typically D2C roots. We tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and talk about their exit potential.
Yeah, and today's brand built $1 billion valuation in just 3 years, which is incredible and insane at the same time, with fewer than 10 products, no paid celebrity endorsements, and a waitlist strategy that would make streetwear brands jealous.
Of course, we're talking about Rhode, the brainchild of Hailey Bieber. And this is not your average celebrity skincare brand. I want to get that out off the gate. Rhode didn't just ride Hailey's fame; it operationalized it. It scaled it. It prepped for an exit before most brands even find product market fit.
Yeah, and in this episode, we'll unpack how Rode built an enterprise grade brand from a culture aesthetic, the tactics that fueled their meteoric rise, and what it really takes to justify $1 billion acquisition.
We're also going to dive into what convinced e.l.f. to spend $1 billion to buy this brand, and what founders can learn from the Rhode playbook.
It's an incredible story, but before we dive in, I got to ask, was there any interesting tidbits that caught your eye the past week?
Yeah, this is a big one. So there's been a lot of conversation around rare earths between China and the U.S. This has become like the biggest lever that China has over the U.S. And so, just as context, as you kind of dig into this, the U.S. is almost entirely dependent on rare earths exports from China for things like EVs, defense, other high tech products. It's because this is where the magnets come from. And the idea is that when we had the tariff escalation in May, this was the weapon that China chose among other ones that really got the U.S.'s attention. They said, "Fine, we're going to cut you off." And within a matter of weeks, it wasn't necessarily the outcry from business. It wasn't the outcry from consumers that prompted a truce to come about. It was this idea that, like, look, we're going to cut you off, and your defense industry is going to grind to a halt. Your auto industry is going to grind to a halt. And this is what was the main reason behind the truce. And they signed an initial truce in Geneva, and then China was accused of slow rolling these permits, even though they said that they were going to start to re-export rare earths. Nothing has really happened, and so they've gotten maximum leverage on the United States. And a couple weeks ago, they were meeting in London to basically say, "Hey, you're going to let these go, right?" And so it's really interesting how the dynamic here has changed. And the agreement they had in London a little while ago was basically an agreement that the agreement they had is still their agreement, and particularly these rare earths exports. But as concessions, it looks like the U.S. is giving way on export controls that they put in place for jet engines, AI chips, other things that previous administrations had thought were kind of critical to national security, national defense, all because we need this raw material.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I think during COVID, a lot of people's eyes opened up to how reliant we are on China for a lot of these raw materials. And so this is, really double clicking on that and helping people understand, okay, we are so reliant on China for a lot of the raw materials that are used in everyday items.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because there was a comment during the negotiations where, they were like, hey, we've got these 25% fentanyl tariffs on there. And if you can cut off the precursors for fentanyl, we'll take these tariffs away. And they're like, it's really hard. We're a big country. The supply chain's really complex. And the US is like, you turn the magnets off in like an hour. So like you could do this if you wanted to.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, before we dive into Rode and just this incredible, growth story, we've got to ask our listeners to do one thing. You've got to review e-commerce on tap and share with a friend. So Aaron and I appreciate you listening and diving in. We read every review and comment. So take a second and do that for us, and we greatly appreciate it. So given that today the brand is really categorized around a celebrity brand, right? I think we should probably start by talking about the celebrity. Who is Hailey Bieber?
Yeah, this is a fun story. So Haley's fame is really a blend of family, fashion, and social presence. So her full name is Hailey Rhode Baldwin Bieber. So Rhode is important there. She was born in 1996 in Tucson, Arizona. She's the daughter of Stephen Baldwin and Brazilian graphic designer Kenya Baldwin. Her uncle is Alec Baldwin. So yes, when the Baldwin name is that Baldwin clan. So she's a very part of a very well known Hollywood family. She was raised homeschooled for a large portion of her life. She was trained as a ballet dancer who really wanted to be a professional at some point, but she had a foot injury early in her career, which ended it before it began. And so this allowed her, or kind of encouraged her, to pivot into modeling. And she was signed by Ford Models in her teens and was doing lots of different types of connections. Her first major campaign was with the French Connection in 2014, and she also walked for other famous designers like Tommy Hilfiger, Elie Saab, and others. From there, she kind of transitioned into being more the face of brands, and so she was featured in Vogue and Elle and Harper's Bazaar and others. And she really started to carve out this niche as having a very polished yet approachable look. She wasn't this high culture, high fashion icon, but was really a relatable, aspirational face. And so this modeling really helped her shift her brand into being a very relatable person for these advertisers to pick up on. She became this go-to person for brands that wanted to blend cool with mainstream reach.
Yeah, and I think, really she gained massive attention for her friendship slash on and off relationship with Justin Bieber that ended up, they got married in 2018, which, was a huge event in the celebrity world. I didn't follow it, very closely, but I definitely had heard about it. And it kind of really elevated her from fashion circles to, global tabloids and fan culture. And, she had hundreds of millions of eyeballs watching everything that she wore, used, or endorsed. And, this really just spiked her social media, right? So she leveraged Instagram and TikTok, sharing her beauty routines, fashion and just personal style. And she kind of developed this distinct clean girl aesthetic before it was even a trend. So you think like slick buns, glossy lips, dewy skin, which, became her personal brand and kind of her signature beauty look, that helped kind of launch the glazed donut skin trend, which, I didn't know at the time, but through my research, found out. And, in 2021, she actually launched a YouTube channel featuring skincare routines, interviews with dermatologists, and GRWM videos. And so I think it was really kind of her personal obsession with skin health and especially managing sensitive skin, and just kind of gave her this authentic voice to talk about her skincare routine and what she does to kind of maintain her skincare. And so I think this is kind of, in my mind, where a brand kind of crosses the chasm to feel more authentic versus opportunistic. And I'm just curious. I mean, we see so many celebrities today that are contacting Izba and Sourcify and just trying to understand how do they launch their own brand. And to me, I think there's a really strong line between authentic versus opportunistic when it comes to these celebrity led brands. And I'm just curious, kind of, what are the footnotes for someone that's trying to understand how do you, really lead with authenticity when it comes to these celebrity brands?
Yeah, I think the key thing is like, are you endorsing this thing because you like it or because of money, right? I kind of go back to the classic bit that Cristiano Ronaldo did with KFC, and it's this great ad you can find on Google where he's holding a bucket of chicken, and it's very clear that like, hey, celebrity endorsement chicken, I get that, but it feels so out of place to me because I wouldn't think of Ronaldo as a chicken guy. I think of him as a soccer guy, right? And so if he was like, hey, I like these cleats, right, that would make a lot more sense than KFC chicken. And so I think that's kind of the difference there is sometimes in the case of the KFC ad, it's so transparent that people get it and they say, okay, I get, this is all borderline funny. But I think what made Hailey so interesting is that she had this following, and the way that she chose to interact with this following was just around skincare and beauty tips and get ready with me and all these sorts of things. And so that was really, people came to know her because of that before she had anything to sell. I think that's the key thing is she made that connection beforehand.
Yeah, and I mean, so Haley, she had not launched her own consumer facing brands before Rhode. She did, however, collaborate with other beauty brands like Bare Minerals and Model Co. And so I think that's a distinct factor as well in terms of like, hey, this is the first time she set out and went to create her own, venture. And she, says this is her baby and took it very seriously. I mean, a lot of people always wonder, was Rhode Hailey's idea?
Absolutely. I mean, by most credible accounts, this was her idea, and uh, she's given interviews where she's talked about wanting to build a brand rooted in her beauty philosophy, which is really minimalist, and she, really values effective, clinically backed skincare with beautiful packaging. And the thought here was to build a brand around her own daily routine and product preferences and beauty principles. And so she began developing Rhode in 2020, and she quietly filed trademarks and began assembling a team. And they had to kind of work through this trademark dispute because there was a fashion brand called Rhode NYC, which kind of pushed the launch back to 2022. But she talked about how she wanted to create products that would reach for every day, simple, effective, and affordable. And so that was really kind of the ethos behind why she thought that she could go do this.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at her YouTube in the past and just how she showcased her skincare routine, I do think she was qualified to start Rhode, right? She wasn't just a celebrity, all of a sudden launching a skincare brand. She had already been showcasing her skincare routine, collaborating with other beauty brands. And so I think she lived this experience of, growing up with sensitive and reactive skin. And she became known over time for her glowing complexion. And she just was deeply immersed working with top makeup artists and dermatologists for nearly a decade as a model to really kind of understand what ingredients, reflect well with her skin. And that's kind of the authentic aesthetic that I think she really showcased across her social media that looked organic and not manufactured. And her fans were already trying to copy it at home. And so, I think Hailey didn't just really sell skincare. She was kind of the mood board that millions of her followers utilized. And so, as she said, I wanted to create something that felt like skincare made by someone who actually uses it and knows what it's like not to want 12 steps. And so, I think she really kind of broke down her skincare routine and created a very simple line of products that, resonated so much with her audience because she already knew that millions of her fans were trying to kind of, replicate what she was doing. And so, I think it's just amazing to see how she put this together. A lot of people probably wonder, was it just her or were there other co-founders here?
Yeah. So tell me, were there other co-founders, or was it just her by herself?
Yes. So despite the company being named after her middle name, Rhode was not built alone. She definitely tapped into a mixture of beauty veterans, branding experts, DTC operators to stand up the business. One, top name was Michael D. Ratner, who founded OBB Media and was the director of Justin Bieber's docuseries. And so he was a close business advisor and early backer, though not officially listed as a co-founder. And so he was really credited with guiding the brand's launch and creative storytelling framework. And it just brings this Hollywood grade level of storytelling, narrative discipline, and a deep understanding of how influencers can be, intertwined with brands. Lauren Ratner brings institutional marketing and growth strategy and lifestyle branding, which was essential, I think, to really scaling the brand beyond its launch and celebrity origin. And so she joined the company in 2020 during its incubation phase and was promoted to president and chief business officer in late 2023. Now she oversees all brand and business operations. And they've also done some pretty unique collaborations that I think Lauren is credited with helping a lot with. So they launched with Krispy Kreme a viral strawberry glazed donut lip treatment that generated, I read this number, did double take 1.4 billion TikTok views, which is just like insane. And I wouldn't even think like Krispy Kreme would be like a relevant partner for this brand. But when I heard that, I was like, wow, I mean, that's just pretty incredible how many views that generated. And so, a fun fact about Lauren and Michael, they started dating in 2018 and were married in 2022. So kind of a bit of a, family relation within the business as well. And, I think one key question that you've got to ask is, would Rhode have worked without Hailey Bieber? Or was, Hailey Bieber really the moat here, especially with her audience?
I mean, that's a really, really good question. I think she was the moat, personally. So I don't think that this works the way it did as quickly as it did without having someone that has that large of a social media following that can launch something. Now, could somebody else have come up with something similar to it? Absolutely. but she's the one that did. I don't. I think that if this was, you know, XYZ person, you know, from the street who had this idea, it'd be so hard because you have to build this following first, and then, you know, have the product there that you can push it. So I personally think that Hailey was the moat.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got to agree with that. I think it was her audience, right, in terms of how she's already engaged with them and showcased her skincare routine and, you know, become known for this kind of glowing skincare aesthetic that so many of her fans tried to replicate and wanted to, you know, aspire to have skin in a similar glow to that. So I would tend to agree. And I mean, you think that, okay, did this come together overnight, right? Because it sounds like she had this teed up, but you know, there was actually quite a bit of development that went into this, right? And so I think a lot of times people think, oh, I'm just going to partner with a celebrity, white label a product, and then go live and launch it. But this in general, I think is not the case really, because number one, you know, these major celebrities or influencers, they really care about what's going into the products in terms of the ingredients, in terms of the manufacturing, in terms of the fulfillment. Like if they launch something and they know they're going to sell millions of units, they don't want that to be a test or pilot. You know, they want it to be the best that it can be from day one. And so I think as an operator, if you're thinking about launching a celebrity driven brand like this, you need to go into that with this understanding that, hey, you're going to spend a lot of time developing this product to make sure that it's perfect for them to really, you know, feel confident showcasing to their followers. And so, you know, early development started in 2020. Hailey began, you know, really working on initial concepts for Rhode. And it took 2 years to fully incubate the brand, handle formulation and product development. And so in mid 2022 is when they actually officially launched with just 3 products, right? And so you would think, wow, they took 2 years to launch 3 products. That's kind of crazy, right? But at the end of the day, she didn't want to rush it, right? And I think this really kind of reflects her commitment in doing it the right way and not the fast way. And that's obviously been a key to their success in terms of understanding from day one that, you know, Hailey and her fans really love the formulation in those 3 initial products.
Yeah, so like 2 years to launch a company, that's kind of a long time in the day of AI. And you know, you see things on TikTok where someone's like, "Oh, I created a brand last night, and here's the aesthetic. I'm gonna go for it." Like, what was she spending her time on? Like, what was missing to the in the market according to Hailey?
Yeah, you know, so she mentions 3 key things. Number one, she kind of continuously is frustrated by overcomplicated routines. She says that most skincare brands push multi-step regimens with overlapping or redundant products. And so she wanted this efficient, minimalist lineup, which was kind of just one of each thing, right? Not a full shelf. And so, you know, she's quoted saying there are too many steps, too many products that didn't work together. I wanted something streamlined but powerful. Number two was a lack of skin barrier focused products. And so, you know, she mentions that she deals with these kind of flare ups of pink scalpy patches around the mouth, a condition that's made worse by overuse of harsh active in fragrances. And so she felt that many products were not formulated for sensitive skin or daily wear. And then she felt there was a mismatch in the market between price and quality. And so she saw this gap between, you know, very high quality science based skincare and accessibility, right? And so, you know, everything at a drugstore was either basic or pristine luxury. And so she wanted to create this luxury feel and performance at a $30 to $40 price point, which, you know, I think if you look back on the product development timeline, that also makes a lot of sense because, you know, to get to that premium product at that lower price point, number one, I can imagine they're probably committing to some pretty serious MOQs right off the bat. And number two, to source, you know, a high grade product like this at a lower price point, you know, there's going to be a lot of negotiation that you have to do and a lot of trial and error with your manufacturer. So I can imagine just, you know, these, you know, steps really took a lot of time to go through. And I think that's kind of, you know, one of the keys here in terms of, you know, why was Rhode successful is Hailey saw this gap in the market that, you know, she felt very frustrated with.
It's kind of impressive, actually. I mean, I think if you didn't know anything, you just assume, oh, you know, it's somebody with a big social media following that's gonna post some pictures by a pool and you know is gonna sell things well. But she's actually really involved in this, and it feels like she's got a really coherent perception in terms of, hey, this is why this is gonna win. So it's almost as if she's got you know either just some inherent very good abilities to recognize where these gaps are, or she's got a great team around her, or probably both. where they're able to say like, this is actually going to work, and here's why. And that business will be successful no matter what. But with you as the face of it, and with your social media, like, this is just going to go through the stratosphere overnight.
Yeah, and so I mean, to really, I think, feel confident in these initial three products, Haley really became deeply involved in product formulation, right? So not only did they test dozens of iterations, but they also partnered with cosmetic chemists and dermatologists to ensure clean, high performance products. So, one former cosmetic chemist they partnered with from Estee Lauder was Ron Robinson, and they collaborated with Ron very early on. And I think Haley often referenced the input of board certified dermatologists, though none were listed as co-founders. I think she really tried to take a scientific approach to the ingredients list here. And she says, "Look, I'm not a doctor, but she's obsessed with skincare and has spent years testing different products, learning from experts, and I think just refining her own routine." And so, I mean, what were some of the kind of key formulations and considerations that they took and that they ended up settling on?
Yeah, again, 2 years to come up with three products. You're kind of making a big bet here. There were a couple of things that stuck out. The first one was that the hero ingredients were really meant to set them apart as a clinically graded formulation. This wasn't going to be an influencer brand or a Me Too type of brand. So they were looking at peptides for skin barrier health and elasticity, niacinamide for tone and texture, and squalene and marilla oil for hydration. So some fairly technical pieces that would would usually make people think more prestige. They want to make sure that, like, hey, we want to be at the cutting edge of science, but still approachable.
Yeah, and I think a key here too is they chose to manufacture in the US. Now, they haven't publicly disclosed who their manufacturers are, but they likely work with one of the top tier contract manufacturers either in California or New Jersey that really specializes in, a clean skincare and FDA registered process. And, I think Rhode really emphasizes their fragrance free and vegan products, and they have sustainable packaging with kind of this minimalist branding and soft neutral tones. And so, I think their ability to scale quickly and relaunch popular SKUs points to a sophisticated supply chain from day one with a really serious, well experienced manufacturing partner, not a white label setup here at all. And I mean, if you look at their launch, it's pretty amazing how it came to be, right?
Yeah, it was very intentional, I think, is the word that people need to think through. They spent really a long time trying to build anticipation. So if you go back, I think people point to early 2021. So again, at this point, she has the idea she's going to do this. She's doing the testing. So through 2021, 2022, there's teasers on YouTube and Instagram. So lots of get ready with me videos where they're featuring mystery products that later turned out to be prototypes for Rhode. And there were some soft product reveals. Fans were speculating about Rhode before it was officially confirmed. And so there's this kind of question like, where is this? What is this going on? And then in March of 2022, the official Rhode social handles were launched with a tagline, "One of everything really good." I think that was a beautiful way to summarize what they were trying to do. So they let that sit out there. They didn't kind of sell anything yet. A couple months later, in June of 22, the launch was confirmed with a really tight, simple drop of three products. So the three products were a peptide glazing fluid, which was the hero SKU, a barrier restore cream, and a peptide lip treatment. And Haley, you think back about the experience with Michael Ratner and Justin Bieber's docuseries, things like that. They spent a lot of time doing a behind the scenes development docuseries where they were looking at packaging prototypes, lab visits, frustrations they were having, really positioning her as hands-on and emotionally invested in this brand as opposed to something that's putting her name on there. So again, we come back to this idea of authenticity, and here people are able to follow along with her and be like, oh, I'm not just here for the photo op. I'm actually testing stuff. I'm able to say, I like this concentration versus that concentration. I think we should use this ingredient versus that ingredient. I like this bottle versus that bottle. And so people are kind of becoming investing in the brand even before they have the product in their hand.
Yeah, and they really did this in a purposeful manner, like you mentioned, right? So their launch strategy really tied in kind of scarcity, viral tutorials, soft storytelling that created this immediate demand, right? So, upon launch, their waitlist generated over 100,000 people The first drop sold out within hours, which you can imagine is just crazy. And they kind of did these micro drops, not their kind of full line. So they focused on those hero SKUs, limited inventory, which really built up that urgency and FOMO. Kind of similar to how like streetwear brands like Supreme build hype. And then of course, the TikTok virality tied into this. There was influencers and beauty creators just reviewing these products constantly. And I think this is kind of on TikTok where that glazed donut skin term took off and became the brand's signature positioning. And Hailey, of course, was the primary influencer, but there wasn't really any like other paid A-listers or celebrity friends. They really, relied just personally on Hailey's usage herself, tutorials, and just the authenticity that she brought to the brand, which I felt seemed very, real, not manufacturer, just, really kind of Hailey is actually using these products every day, right? And I think that's really what, got her fans so excited by Rhode.
I think you're absolutely right. And it is very rare that you have the fusion of authenticity and a huge social media following. I can't think of anybody else who's done this successfully. I don't, can you?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this was like the outcome of this, well crafted storytelling message that we talked about. And it kind of seems like this overnight success, right? Because you had immediate sellouts of their peptide glazing fluid that became kind of a hot cult hit that was, waitlisted all the time. They had earned media across, Vogue and New York Times Style, and they just would continue to cover the launch on these major media channels. And then you had kind of dermatologists as well as creators that were bought into this, posting positive reviews and YouTube creators just adding to the clinical credibility, which was amazing. And so by early 2023, Rhode had reportedly reached over 100 million in revenue and then doubled again in 2024 to, probably around 200 million with 10 SKUs. And so, I mean, they launched in 2022. So, I mean, that's just a pretty insane rise in terms of revenue, right? I mean, there's very few brands that we see grow like that, and this might be one of the fastest growing skincare brands we've ever seen.
I mean, it's unheard of. It's completely. I mean, just think about that. Like the first couple of months, they were out of inventory, right? They were intentionally dropping and being scarce. So they probably could have even sold more in the first year if they wanted to. But $100 million for your launch is not a bad graph to put in your pitch deck.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me wonder, right? Like on this season of e-commerce on tap, we're talking about skincare, and so it makes me wonder: was Rhode taking market share from other brands, or were they, I mean, where is all this? Where are all these buyers coming from, right? Are they coming from other brands?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's no official statistics to say, XYZ customers converted from this brand to this other brand. But I think you can look at kind of what happened and where they likely came from. And so I think the key insight that Hailey had that really motivated Rhode in the product category and the strategy and the marketing was that less is more, and that people trust skin advice from someone whose skin looks like they use it, right? And there was no better advocate than Hailey. And so they tried to position themselves between clinical and cool, clean, and they tried to take market share from incumbents that were trying to do too much. And so if you look at kind of who the likely candidates were, Glossier, right, is one that would come to mind. Similar aesthetic, kind of more on the cosmetic side these days. But Rhode was moving faster and felt fresher post 2020. Drunk Elephant, another massive one that we may or may not get to this season. They also had peptides in the clean ethos, but they had much higher prices. Summer Fridays has similar packaging and a dewy focus, but they had less viral momentum. So Summer Fridays is interesting because it's almost as if it's like, what if we take just the product that we have that's really good and not have Hailey Bieber, right? Like that's your comparison case. The Ordinary has really great formulations, but they lack the lifestyle branding or the simplicity. It's a little bit more involved. Fenty, right? Rihanna's skincare brand is more cosmetic. Again, not really a skin influencer momentum, and they're trying to do a lot of things. And so there's just so many pieces here. It's hard to know for sure, but I think being able to say we're going to do a few things and we're going to do a few things extremely well serve them very, very well, especially competing against brands that were trying to do it all.
Yeah, and I think we can learn so much from their post-launch strategy. Number one, slow product rollouts, right? I think you see a lot of these celebrity-driven brands just launch so much right away, and they really rolled out things pretty slow. Number two, very careful and deliberate channel expansion, and then operational upgrades. And so, kind of, I guess, how their product expansion went is, they started doing lip tint versions of their peptide lip line, and then new flavors, limited edition packaging, stuff like that. But still, by mid 2024, they had under 10, main products that reinforced this kind of restraint. And I think it's got to say something about the beauty industry. And the most talked brand has, fewer than 10 SKUs, right? I mean, that's just kind of unheard of in most industries. But here it's, pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that restraint that you were talking about, and I think that this idea of really having a tight idea about what your portfolio is going to look like, and not just chasing everything else because the incremental revenue looks good on paper, was amazing. And so they got the density and the volume. It was easier to forecast because you've got 10 SKUs to worry about, and people know what it is, and it's they've done a great job penetrating that way in such a crowded market.
Yeah, and you can imagine they had retailers just knocking at their door saying,
For
"Hey,
sure.
we want to distribute your products. We want you in, Sephora and Ulta and all these other stores." But they actually remained mostly D2C for, all of 2022 and most of 2023. In 2024, they entered Sephora Canada. They had a UK expansion, and then they've, hinted at Asia this year in 2025. So they really continue to leverage waitlist, content drops, and loyalty programs to drive retention. And their team and infrastructure has also been built up over time. So they built, back end systems to forecast and plan demand, and just, better ways to address sellouts with better replenishment timelines. And they brought in, I think a key hire here was Nick Balhus from Honest Co. that kind of systemized their ops and omni-channel retail and just set up their international logistics. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting that they brought in a professional CEO prior to any acquisition. What do you think about that? Really kind of signaled to potential acquirers.
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth on this because every acquirer is going to want to put their stamp on it. So in some cases, they want to know, like, hey, I want to put my person in there. But I think what's really interesting about this is that, hey, this is a celebrity brand, and there's always going to be a question if the celebrity gets disinterested in their brand or starts to do something else, is it going to be operationally sound? Or the celebrity is really well known and is a good social influencer, but can they make the decisions? Can they run an actual business here? And so I think bringing Nick in and saying, this is our CEO, we're going to build around him, those sorts of things. We're going to have Hailey do the things that she's good at, but she doesn't have to worry about finance and supply chain and marketing, all these other things. That, I think, signal to acquirers that they are actually buying a business and not just celebrity merch. And I think that was a really interesting thing to do. And we saw that last season on the athleisure brands that we looked at, where people were bringing in these experienced CEOs maybe earlier than they had to because they knew it was the best thing for the business, and the founders are still able to stay involved some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a key strategic move, right? And especially you look at the growth and just timeline here of Rhode. I mean, to summarize, it's remarkable, right? So they launched in 2022 with 3 products in June. They sold out within hours. Late 2022, the estimated revenue is about 50 million, all direct to consumer. 2023 crossed 100 million in annual sales. They expand their product line just a bit. 2024, they reportedly hit 200 million in revenue. And, this is kind of when they started to prepare for a potential sale or even IPO. And so they hired JP Morgan to explore sale options. And the target valuation here was $1 billion, which just like, it's
Sure.
crazy. I mean, they started, less than 4 years, and now they're selling for $1 billion. And so, just I think 2 weeks ago, e.l.f. announced that they're acquiring Rhode at $1 billion valuation, which is just an incredible outcome for this short timeline of a brand. I mean, I guess I've got to ask, like, why do you think they were ready for acquisition in such a short amount of time?
Well, I think this was the goal from the beginning. I mean, I've got another podcast, Build a Business Worth Buying, And it's interesting when I talk to founders or talk to acquirers, and it's very intentional, the people who know what they're doing and saying, okay, I'm going to build something I know someone else wants to purchase, versus someone who sees it as a lifestyle and it's like a fun thing and it's who they are. And then, oh, by the way, they stumbled into something that is acquirable. And so I think that this was the plan all along. And this wasn't just to say, hey, we think that you can make a couple $1,000,000 by selling your own stuff, but no, we want to create generational wealth. We want to do something. We want to change the conversation around skincare, and so it's pretty interesting. But I mean, to get to $200 million in revenue, $1 billion exit in under 3 years, this is something that very few D2C brands can claim. Especially on just such a minimal SKU count. I mean, the density and the turns of these products is amazing. And I think it's telling to kind of dig into the deal a little bit more. Do you want to walk through kind of who they were talking to, what the process looked like?
Yeah, so I mean, they hired JP Morgan, right, to take them to market. And the rumored suitors were everyone from Estee Lauder to LVMH to even Unilever and potentially an IPO, depending on just market conditions at the time. Ultimately, they sold to e.l.f. The deal was valued at $800 million at closing, broken up between $600 million in cash and $200 million in equity, and then $200 million will be paid out as part of an earnout. And so Hailey continues to be the creative lead and face of the company, which I think is a key. And I think one thing we should discuss is just that we've seen a lot of celebrity brands get acquired, and sometimes they haven't been able to keep up with growth or kind of fizzle out when the celebrity gets distracted. I mean, how do you think an acquirer, like how do you think e.l.f. went about, understanding and assessing if this brand can survive without, Hailey as the face?
Yeah, I think there's 5 key questions that acquirers are asking around celebrity brands. The first one is this brand sticky without them? Right? Will people buy it if they're not the face of it? And what they want to see is repeat purchases. They want to see SKU loyalty and LTV independent of the overall celebrity's personality. So that's the first question. The second one is their infrastructure. They want to know that you have systems, leadership, regulatory readiness, so that this is something that can be bolt on to a proper CPG company that doesn't run a whole lot of regulatory risk. Third question is, are there additional growth levers that can be pulled? And so, you look at Rhode, they can expand into pretty much any category that they want. They're not really into retail. There's a huge vertical that way. They're not in most of the world. And so there's a whole lot of upside here. Whereas if they had said, hey, we're going to launch a skincare line with 100 different items and we're going to be global from day one, it's like, okay, well, I guess I could put more ad dollars behind this. But what made this one so interesting was that there is so much fat on the bone here. And to some extent, people are like, man, like, did Hailey sell too soon? That kind of gets into the fourth question: can it be globalized? Do they have clean ingredients? Is there a universal appeal? Of course, formulations are going to need to be tweaked a little bit depending on the regulatory environment. And then the last kind of key question is: does it command margin? So will it, because of the brand that's been built and not just the celebrity, does it have the ability to have a premium price at mass scale with limited discounting? And I think as you start going through those questions, Rhode checks every one of those boxes. And I wasn't part of those conversations with the strategics, but I'm sure people were like, "Man, this is good. Like this, we don't see these too often."
Yeah, there's definitely a lot here. I mean, to me, a billion is obviously a lot of money. And I think another key question to ask would be trying to understand from the acquirer side, what do they need to kind of justify that $1 billion price point?
Yeah, so if you just do some easy math, let's just assume $1 billion price point, right? Acquisition point, and 15% EBIT margins and 5x EBIT evaluation. So that would mean that the buyer would need to have about $300 million in EBITDA over 3 years, which likely means a business around $500 to $600 million within 3 to 4 years. And so, you look at, okay, Rhode's at 200 today, they could very well easily get there in a period of time. They can expand globally. There's portfolio expansion that's available. There's a lot of other synergies that could be done as they fold Rhode into e.l.f., whether it's leveraging supply chain or retail channels or things like that. And so I think that the acquirer in this case is looking at, does this have the ability to be a master brand or a platform as opposed to just a product that we're buying?
Yeah, and I think too they, like you said, they need to believe their buying this platform that they can expand and grow. And it does seem like the team is well on their way to hitting their goals, which kind of makes you ask, like, why sell now? Why not wait? Right? I mean, to me, I kind of think that they sold too early because, you're describing all these major upsides that e.l.f, the acquirer, has to expand this brand. And it seems like that's going to happen just a matter of time. And so I kind of wonder, like, why sell now, right?
It's a good question. I mean, if you're listening to the Rhode story for the first time, you'd probably think, of course, this was inevitable, right? Someone who has the social media following that, dabbles in skincare that launched, of course, it's going to sell for $1 billion, but nothing is guaranteed. And I think that there's a few reasons why Hailey and her team may have chosen to de-risk it. And again, they've got a decent amount of equity in e.l.f, so it's not as if they are not participating in the upside that could come in the future. I think the first thing they looked at is they were able to de-risk the win. So $1 billion exit locks in generational wealth for lots of people on that team. She retains credibility for her life without needing to be in the weeds forever, and she can still stay on creatively or on the board. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, to some extent, the easy part has been done. And D2C is only getting harder, whether it be Apple's privacy changes, CAC spikes, uncertainty. Those are the difficult parts. And so they've gotten to be pretty close to the apex of where they can get to just on TikTok and celebrity and D2C. But now they're entering another phase where it's going to be more difficult, right? It might be 5x the revenue down the road, but now they have to think about a global supply chain, retail, regulatory support, working capital, all these other things that are going to take money to put into the business before it gets returned. And so there's a question of, they're either going to take on investment or they were going to sell, because there is work that needs to be done in order to get it from 200 million to 600 million. And then I think the last part is just like the timing. This is a perfect storm for strategic buyers. I was just talking with a VC the other day, and they do a lot in this space, and they're just saying, like, there are a lot of really great deals that acquirers are going. They're sitting on these mountains of cash, and they are going out, and the multiples are right, and they're kind of bolting on. And so you're seeing this flurry of activity that is happening in the summer of 2025, and it's going to continue through the summer through the fall, where these beauty giants are looking to acquire Gen Z loyal strategic cultural assets, is how they look at it. And it's from their perspective, a lot of these other brands are kind of in a similar trajectory. It's still early enough that there's a lot of meat on the bone. They can take a huge bite of the apple and continue to grow, and they're just kind of in a better position to provide the capex and do it without dilution. So I think that it's always easy to sit back and say, hey, maybe we should have sold earlier. But I always go back to when I was working at Mirror, and during COVID, that business sold for $500 million to Lululemon. And at the time, I remember some conversations like, "Oh, we sold too early. We could have gotten $1 billion. We should just kept going for a year or two." But man, that founder sold right at the peak of COVID, and then a year and a half later, COVID was over and Connected Fitness collapsed. And so, had they waited another year and a half, they would not have gotten that valuation. They would not gotten that multiple. So, I think it's easy to think that grass is always greener, but sometimes it's like, hey, this is a lot of money. Would I take this money today? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of reminds me of what you talk about a lot in terms of the exit window, in terms of understanding when is the right time to sell, and how do you kind of craft that perfect exit window for your company, and seeing into the future and understanding your operations, and understanding what an acquirer could do to help you grow, or if the market's going to change, and being able to see that. I mean, I know you kind of talk a lot about this exit framework that a lot of brands should emphasize and dive into. I mean, do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of how you figure out if you're in that window or not. Obviously, we talked a little bit about it, where there are thresholds of investment that you need to do, right? If you're just launching in the US, you need a different type of team, you need a different type of supply chain than if you're trying to be global, right? Just think about marketing and kind of the muscle you have to build there. So there's natural points where you're looking at, am I ready? Do I have other means of making that investment? But if you look at the actual brand itself, Rhode is at the peak of its cultural relevance. And so, e.l.f. is looking at this and saying, wow, there's a really strong halo here. We could put lots of other products behind there if we wanted to. They're not discounting. They've got a strong margin. So there's a piece there. I think that there's also just this idea that the multiples are the right level, and so it's possible, to outgrow an exit window and have to wait for later. And so, Rhode was fortunate; they bootstrapped everything, they didn't raise institutional money. But if they had raised $400 million in venture capital, even $1 billion exit, that would look like a failure because they want 10x their revenue. So they would have to grow and be in a position to sell for $4 billion. And there's just not that many companies that are willing to write a $4 billion check. And so I think that looking at this and making sure that you haven't raised too much money, there's a window that your investors will allow you to exit at where they're going to feel happy about it. And then just looking at like what you're going to need to do from an investment point of view to get those next thresholds is important.
Yeah, and I think there's just so much that, other brands and founders can take away from Rhode, right? And especially as you think about celebrity-driven brands and just these kind of influencer-driven brands, there's so much here. I think number one, top of mind for me, is that Hailey didn't just lend her name; she really built the brand and kind of was in the development process, and was able to showcase it from an authentic lens. And I think she treated Rhode like a real business, not just a merch drop, right? She was in the weeds developing the formulations, obsessed over packaging, and just hired a world-class team. I think number two, they stayed really kind of minimalist in terms of their business strategy. They didn't chase every category. They just had 3 SKUs and still fewer than 10 total products, and focused on kind of repeat purchases to drive growth. And I think number three, they had professionalized operations early on. So the brand just was, continuing to grow, and they were able to scale with it because they really had the right operators in place. Like hiring Nick from Honest Co. By year 3, that was a huge key hire for them. And so they built real systems, real demand planning, and logistics infrastructure to be able to scale and keep up with demand, and just culture timing as well, right? So I think they really tried to define this era of skincare look, and others followed. Just the TikTok trends and the beauty influencers that we're talking about, Rhode, just was pretty incredible to see as I was researching this. And just they own that kind of glazed donut skin narrative that I think is going to continue to be a key for them. So I mean, this is our first episode of the skincare season on e-commerce on tap, and I think it's going to be hard to top this story just because it's just so incredible. There's so much to take away here, and the outcome is just phenomenal.
Yeah, we've got some great episodes coming up, so make sure you tune in next week. But I guess the question is, what can we learn from Rhode? And the answer is a lot, actually. That focus scales faster than variety, that founder involvement beats celebrity endorsement, and that operations, not just aesthetics, may make or break billion-dollar brands.
Yeah, and I mean, Rhode didn't just create a look; they created a system of customer obsession, operational precision, and whether or not you're building for an exit, that's a system that's definitely worth studying.
Yeah, if you enjoy this breakdown, again, please tune in the future. We've got a lot of great brands on the docket, and we're going to be going through everything from K beauty to clean beauty. This is obviously celebrity beauty, so you'll get a real deep dive into skincare.
And if you're a founder thinking about your own exit window, or an operator wondering how to scale their back end, let's talk. Both Izba and Sourcify help so many different brands grow and get to scale and handle their supply chain. And thanks again for tuning in to E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. Leave us a review or comment. Aaron and I read each one and greatly appreciate you tuning in this episode of E-commerce on Tap.